Post-medieval Dilton and Dilton Marsh. Post-medieval Dilton has to be considered as almost two separate places, with Old Dilton from 1580s remaining very much a small settlement of some 20 or so dwellings. These dwellings were often adapted to suit residents' line of work, with weaving being the main occupation, along with arable and animal farming. Hand weaving would also often be undertaken by farm workers to supplement their earnings during poor harvest times. Old Dilton's chief claim to importance undoubtedly lay with the location of St Mary's Church, it being the only location by some miles for baptisms and burials. In fact, St Mary's could comfortably hold a congregation in excess of some 100 persons drawn from Dilton Marsh, Chapmanslade, Stormore and Bremeridge, which confirms it as being the centre which catered for a greater surrounding region. Dilton Marsh probably grew in both population and activity following the Enclosures Act of 1773. Despite the Act being used by the local landowners to lay claim to preferential pasture land, many locals who had previously lived on common land also had the opportunity to own their plot. As a result, by 1808-1809, cottages which had been built on wasteland in Dilton Marsh were essentially allowed to redefine their garden areas to the front of their properties, towards the roadway, which subsequently, to a large degree, determined the current layout of the village. By the beginning of the 19th century, Dilton Marsh had become a centre of the hand-weaving industry, having up to 150 hand-weavers. The weavers were often wives who worked during the evening and night hours, while the husbands typically worked as farm labourers during the day.
Life in the 18th century in Dilton Marsh, and 19th century come to that, would have been pretty hand-to-mouth for the majority of people there. The main industries that existed then were obviously farming, agriculture. There was weaving, and a bit of asides in clay brickworks. But really, all those works, all those jobs that were available to them paid subsistence level. There was no support. What they earned is what they got. It was pretty hard going. To earn a living in those days, I mean, you were a farm labourer. And farm labourers were working in all weathers, all conditions, stuck out in the middle of a field. And they worked long hours. I mean, they didn't start at 8 or 9 o'clock. These guys were up when it was light. And they didn't finish until it was dark. So it was a prolonged day. And when they got home, someone else would take over that work because the work ethic related to their partners, their wives, very often. And they were engaged with weaving or supporting the weaving industry. And so the opportunity for relaxing and having a time when they could talk together was pretty small.
Populations in Dilton Marsh have been listed as 1,582 in 1811, 1,306 in 1971, and 1,934 in 2011. But these figures could well have been dictated by subsequent boundary changes. It could be argued that the building in 1844 of Holy Trinity Church, funded mostly by Thomas Phipps of Chalcot House, designed by Thomas Wyatt and built by William Brown of Frome, was a confirmation of the status of Dilton Marsh as being the major settlement as against Old Dilton. Other industries located within Dilton Marsh were brickworks.
To my knowledge, the Westbury brickworks kicked off in the very late 19th century and went through to the middle of the 20th century. And their primary produce was roof slates, bricks, and they finished up with producing garden pots. One of the guys was talking to me about the slates in Dilton Marsh. Well, You could always tell a slate made in Dilton Marsh because it was bent over their knees. And you're thinking, goodness me, how would anyone know that? But that was a unique feature about slates made in Dilton Marsh. Just one small item of all the bits of information that are thrown at you. The other major industry that you could relate to Dilton Marsh was a company called Charles Case. And they primarily produced their products between 1920 through to the middle of the 1980s. Their primary product was leather, and they produced untanned leather. The actual process of doing that was well known by everyone in the local area because it really did send some pretty strong smells. But however, it was a very big employer for Dilton Marsh. Those industries that existed within Dilton Marsh, what they didn't just do is provide employment. They provided a place for people to meet. Strange as that sounds, it was a meeting place. You can't help but get to know people. And the company's bosses, owners, had seen a point there where they could support the local community by getting these guys, when they left work, to go and do something else that was community-based. Now, that was very often attached to sports activities, sometimes for a char-a-bang trip away. But it was something that the guys that worked within that industry stayed together, and there was a community there.
One distinct claim to fame the village has is by having been one of the very few to have had a poem dedicated to its station, Dilton Halt, by poet laureate John Betjeman. His daughter attended to dedicate a sign containing the poem in May 1994. Some of our recent local history research into Dilton's history have confirmed the huge difference in lifestyles experienced by residents over the last 80 or 90 years, with the ability to travel being perhaps one of the largest influences. For example, villagers in the 1930s would have had a range of shops available, from sweet shops, grocers, bakers, post office, cobblers, bus or coach garage, blacksmiths, coal carriers, dairy farms, not to mention several public houses and undertakers. However, with the advent of the motor car, villagers have a post office, shop, hairdresser, car maintenance garage, and just one public house, with all other supplies being often accessed from Westbury, Warminster, and Trowbridge. No doubt this has been the experience of many villages of similar size and location.